Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this lovely Wednesday. Today, we'll have the esteemed author Jin Lee join us for the Talks at Google program. A graduate of the Bronx High School of Science, she studied history at Yale and then received a JD from Georgetown University Law Center. She's the author of Free Food for Millionaires and Pachinko, and is currently also the writer-in-residence at Amherst. So please give a warm welcome to Min. Hello, Min. So wonderful to have you with us here today. Where are you right now, and how are things where you are?
Well, I live in Harlem, and I live in New York City, and I teach at Amherst in the fall, so I'm here. But I'm okay. It's just overwhelming.
So by overwhelming, tell us more about that. Is it, the amount of work you have going on, the situation in New York?
Well, I find it really hard. I find the sirens really hard. Everybody I know, there's a lot of people that I know who've been laid off. I know people who are working harder than ever. And I think that this is a really difficult time. And I think that I want to sound more optimistic, but it's really discouraging sometimes. And I want to figure out a new narrative. So that's part of my job.
As an author, that's true. Well, you seem very deeply embedded in and enamored with the spirit of New York, right? You went to high school here, you grew up here, and now you're writing here back in New York again. So as a writer and creator, how are you thinking about documenting these times? Has quarantine changed the way that you work?
Oh, the quarantine has changed the way all of us work. I think that even just meeting you right now virtually, it's something that I'm really do. I'm 51 years old, and I'm not anti-technology. I'm actually a pretty, early adapter of most things. But at the same time, I'm always kind of thinking like, wow, I have to learn that again, or I have to learn a new thing. And there's constantly new information. And it's good because it keeps you learning. At the same time, it also requires you to learn more skills. And very often in this economy, the thing that I really see is that people are required to know more things, but they're not necessarily rewarded or recognized or compensated for those things. And it's something that I think that we all have to be more thoughtful about.
Absolutely. I'm sure as things, people get restructured, reshuffled, there's going to be that demand. So an empathy for that is important. So, coronavirus is kind of at the forefront of culture today, right? And this is currently AAPI month, the celebration of Asian American Pacific Islander heritage here. How have you been navigating what it means to be, Asian American and even just of the broader narrative being a person of color today? What are you seeing and what are you thinking of?
Well, today I was really surprised and really saddened to hear about George Floyd, who was murdered yesterday, and to learn that one of the 4 police officers was Asian American. And I think that recognition of that and speaking out against the fact that how Asian Americans can be complicit against African Americans is something that I think we should all speak out against. In the same way, if we expect allies when people are attacking Asian Americans, we should certainly really think about how we could be anti-racist. And I think anti-racism is the minimum requirement that we have.
Yeah, that's very powerful, especially during these times. We've heard a lot of saddening news affecting a lot of, minority communities. So I agree with you that is something that we should all be doing, trying to provide allyship and community during these times. So I want to talk a little bit about your writing, right? I know a lot of people who are on the line today are very excited about your books, major super fans. So I want to talk a little bit about how you became a writer, right? So after graduating from Yale and Georgetown, you were a practicing lawyer for a couple of years. What actually catapulted you into a career of writing? What was that moment when you realized I need to act and making a change to actually begin writing?
Well, I used to be a corporate person. So for those of you guys who are watching, you'll understand. I remember thinking that, I don't know if I can do this. It's really impossible. And at one point, I built 300 hours in a month, which is a lot of hours. I was working 7 days a week. And then I thought, you know what, I don't know. And then I finished a big project, and I kind of thought after I handed it in, my partner would say, good job, go home because you don't sleep anymore. In fact, the partner gave me another assignment. And I remember just without any preparation, I said, I quit. Now, I didn't quit to be a writer. So, and most people are really surprised by this. I thought that I had to figure something out because I didn't expect to quit that day, but it was just the sheer overwork. And I don't really recommend this to you guys. It's not well thought out. And I only had about $15,000 saved in the bank, which is a lot of money. Mm-hmm. However, we had a mortgage to pay. So it was a lot of reshuffling. I didn't publish a novel until about 11 years until after I quit my career. Yeah. So for those of you who are thinking about quitting and writing another book in 2 years and replacing your income, maybe you could do it, but I couldn't do it.
Well, looking back, right? So you made this, pivotal decision. I'm going to leave the law. And then what led you into writing? Was it, as a child, did you enjoy writing? In your college years, what eventually led you down that path?
Oh, I've always written. I love writing. It's actually the only reason why I stay a writer, because being a writer is really unstable. And I always tell my students this, because they always kind of think, well, you're successful, I should be a writer. I'm thinking, you should be a writer if you want to write something, but it doesn't really work out the way you think it's going to work out. So that's one thing. But how did I plan this? I didn't really plan it. I just really thought I would try. I thought I would try. And then I thought that I would learn how to do it. And I didn't have the money to go to get an MFA. And then, so I took a lot of cheap classes, and then I kept on going. And I was just really discouraged the whole time, because I was just getting rejections upon rejections upon rejections. And then I realized that the thing that I wanted to do was really difficult. Like, now I look back and go, oh, you wanted to write a big, epic saga, both times. And I still want to write these big, big books. And I realized, like, oh, it was kind of hard to do. But now but back then I just kind of thought I was a loser. So
definitely not the case, I think, ever. But that's very inspiring, that idea of, like, all it takes is just stepping out and trying, right? So for those who are aspiring to write on top of existing day jobs or multiple jobs, what advice do you have about structuring time, or like what helped you stay focused, especially amidst all the, discouragement and rejection that you may have faced?
I think what's really helpful when I talk to writers who are working part-time or as a side hustle or as a private hobby that you can't even discuss with your family members, I've met a lot of those writers, is to ask yourself why you want to tell that story. I would forget the applause. I would forget the recognition. I would forget the income. If you forget those things and say, oh, I really want to write this because I have something to say, then I think that you're going to write books, and you're going to write stories, and you're going to write essays, and all those things, I think, have the possibility to be published. But I think if you focus on, oh, things are going to work out for me, or I don't have to, go show up to the office anymore, I don't know. I haven't seen that.
So it's interesting that you talk about the stories that you want to tell, right? So I'm going to read you one of your quotes. Okay. It makes sense that I'm a writer, which allows me to draft and to hesitate and to rewrite many times before I say anything that I can live with for good, right? So writing is a way for many people to find their voice. And how have you gone about finding yours and refining it through this art medium?
It's been so difficult, just because I don't know how you grew up, but as an Asian American immigrant, mm-hmm. in my culture and my background, I didn't know writers. It wasn't like people were hanging on my every word when I was a child. And I grew up in public schools, and I didn't have creative writing class. Like nowadays, like if you send a kid to school, they'll come home in kindergarten, they'll come with like 4 staple pages and go, oh, look, I wrote a book and published it. I mean, it's wonderful. I didn't have that experience. So in a way, all I did was read. I read all the time. So in a way, I loved the book, the written word. But in terms of me finding my own voice, I think it took me a longer time than most people, because I didn't know that what I had to say even had value. And I think that's something that I'm hoping the generation and the generation younger than you actually have a stronger foundation. I mean, I'm 51, so I'm a Gen Xer.
Very young.
So, and I think that I'm hoping that the younger folks actually feel like, oh, what I say is important, and I want to keep sharing what I think. I mean, I really love what my students say. My students are so wonderful. They're Generation Z, and they have such cool thoughts, and they have really much better hearts, I think, than the older folks. So I kind of want more of them to talk and to share.
No, that's great. It is true. I had a very similar child to you. I was also the daughter of two refugees who came from Vietnam after the war. And, during that time, I also spent my childhood as a bookworm, grew up on the public library. And then naturally, the second question I had was, should I become a lawyer? I don't know. I wasn't as strong as math and sciences. I thought maybe I should become a lawyer. I have strengths there. And you're right. It is harder. When growing up, I think I read very few Asian authors, or Asian Canadian or Asian American authors. And it's very inspiring, to have you here with us today, because now when I go to the bookstore, I see last names that would not usually appear, in the 90s and the early 2000s as much. So very inspirational to have you here. Well, I also want to go back a little bit to, telling stories that are often overlooked and not told, right? So, your childhood was spent here in New York, in Queens. You've written before that you were the daughter of wholesale jewelers. You've also said that history has also failed almost everyone who is ordinary, right? So how did your immigrant background, shape the way that you look at characters you build? And how can we better find and tell the stories, ordinary, everyday people?
I think that all of us know those stories. Mm-hmm. And I think what's really remarkable to me is why we don't think they're worth telling in an epic way. I really think that Asian Americans are really cool and funny and sexy and smart. and I'm really surprised when they're not recognized in that way or represented that way. And I don't think that it's our fault. I don't think I have to be more interesting or more funny. I actually think somebody fucked up, but it's not me. And I say this, including in front of my students, because their parents aren't saying that. Their parents aren't saying that. And I think very often the thing that I do take, and I understand why. I think that if your parents are refugees, and my father was a war refugee, and I think that if you come from a working class background, very often you're punished for speaking. Speaking is actually a costly thing. So, and also to express what you really think, that requires that you have a government that allows you to speak. And some of us come from governments where you are not allowed to say what you can still get in trouble today for saying those things. So it's an extraordinary privilege. So, it's not just I want to be a writer. It's oh, you want to be a writer and say what you believe? And also, can you handle the repercussions? I'm a trustee of PEN America, and one of the reasons why I decided to join the organization is because the freedom to say what you really believe is actually an extraordinary thing that we must defend in this country and also everywhere. So that's kind of a long way to say, how do I find my voice? How do I encourage others to do it? Is to, I guess, even when I don't want to say certain things, I try, because most of the times people don't even see people like you and me on the screen, right? And sure, saying things that they're thinking, oh, we didn't know that Asians even thought this way, and going, no, they all think this way. We all have different kinds of thoughts, but do you ever hear it in a public platform? And for that reason, I decided to overcome all of my anxieties and introversion and fear of speaking, because I think we all have to get out there more and be willing to be judged.
Absolutely. Even recently, this past weekend, Memorial Day weekend, there were a couple things I've been watching. The Other Half of It and Never Have I Ever. Back in the day, this TV series would have never featured Asian Americans in the same way. And now on Netflix, it's, top trending media. So, I'm really curious about this conversation about the freedom to express and freedom to convey the ideas that you have, right? And you're right that for a lot of groups that do come here and are working class and are immigrants, there can be an aversion to that at times, right? I want to talk about writing as a resistance born out of art. And art is created by a person. And in my vantage point, the personal has always been political. So, as an author, are you intentional about weaving this into your work? If yes, fiction, nonfiction, how do you look at the effectiveness of medium? And do you want to incite action through the writing that you create?
Oh, very much so. I'm really political. And actually, every one of my pieces of writing is incredibly political. I'm not writing just to entertain. I think entertainment is important because I have to get you to hang out with me. That's the trick. But then if you really think about it, I'm really questioning capitalism. I'm questioning racism. I'm questioning sexism. I'm questioning, this whole idea of being binary. I'm questioning religion. I'm questioning those things because they don't always serve us in the way that they promise to serve us. So even though I am a capitalist. I believe in capitalism. I think that it's been incredibly offensive the way it's been taken out of control, and we don't have any protections for those who are vulnerable. So, and the way I explore my questions is really through art. Do I want to incite action? Absolutely. Absolutely. Because things aren't going to change unless you're inspired to stick your neck out. And it's not easy to stick your neck out.
Absolutely. I find that a huge demonstration of courage from your part, and also, the medium which you deliver it, I think causes people to really have a lot of reflection about what they're reading. So, you mentioned, the entertainment part is important, right? So how do you really write so that you engage readers in this new world, right? Pachinko was not set in modern day times, but people spent hours, poring over the book. How do you humanize a different culture as you did in Pachinko? What type of research or writing strategies did you use?
Well, I think that if you don't have the tools of drama, you're not going to be able to convince people, or a lot of people, to stay with you. And I think that the narrative tools of drama, whether it's conflict, tone, point of view, plot, characterization, imagery, lyricism, all those things that I'm mentioning, diction, syntax, and it's like a toolkit. It's like, I imagine that if you're a software engineer, you have to learn the language in which to make the best possible product. Well, I had to learn a language of drama. And that you can't just say, oh, I feel inspired, I'm going to write a story. It doesn't really work that way. Like, there's actually a lot of rules. There's a lot of glitches. And if you don't do it, you're going to have a lot of bugs. So I think about that, one. But then also, what is it that I really want to say? And then if you don't have something that you want to say, and if you don't have the tools, you're not going to be able to create art. And I think that a lot of people who aren't from the humanities very often think that in the humanities, it's anything goes. And it's anything that is so completely untrue. And I say this as somebody who went to the Bronx High School of Science. Actually, I'm competent in math and sciences. And I have nothing but respect for all the people that I went to high school with who ended up, winning Nobels kind of thing. And I'm saying this because there's a science and there's an architecture and a beauty if you look underneath how great art is created. But I also think it's important that you have something to say. And that takes some faith that it has value. And that's really hard for a lot of Asian Americans because they haven't been encouraged to do this in this country because they're new. They're new. Well, and even if you're really, really old, like you could be multi-generations, like 6, 7 generations in the United States. The culture right now says that you're still foreign, and the forever foreign quality of Asian Americans makes it really hard to say what you believe, and it takes a risk.
So, kind of going on to that, you just spoke about like, hey, it may seem that writing is a little bit different than, let's say, software engineering, anything goes, but there's actually quite an art to it, right? And, a lot of determination and work behind it. So what does a writer's day actually look like? Because most of us at Google, a few of us I know have published books and are in the process of writing books or have dreams and little seeds of like eventually getting there. But what does, your day-to-day really look like in your wonderful office?
Oh, I work all the time. I'm constantly working. I actually have 5 jobs. So most people don't know. I have 5 jobs, which are actually paid jobs. I have other jobs that I'm not paid at all. So, and when you're a modern writer now, and if you establish any kind of success, part of my unpaid job, which takes an enormous amount of time, is just being a good literary citizen. Like, for example, I judge awards. So last year I judged a Pulitzer Prize, and the year before that I judged a National Book Award. Like, you can't even imagine how many things you got to do, and that's just something that you just do. And you're paid a modest amount, but you do it because it's part of being a good citizen. I teach at Amherst in the fall. What else do I do? I also give public lectures, which takes me around the world. And then I also, I do freelance work. So last week I had a piece in the New York Times, and I was talking about COVID-19 and how we treat merchants. What else is there? I also, was that 4? I can't remember. And then I'm working on this little thing for television right now, which is another kind of writing. So there's all these different kinds of writing. It's like whether you write a speech or whether you teach a class or whether you write novels or whether you write articles for newspapers, they're all different kinds of writing. And I work all the time. Like last night I was working, and I have to start the whole thing again because I really didn't do it well, is I'm writing the introduction for The Great Gatsby for Penguin Classics when it comes in January. So I'm introducing this, probably the most widely read novel about Americans in the world.
It's highly impressive. And did I just hear you say you're also working on a TV series? I know you probably can't share too much information about it, but is it Pachinko that's going to be on TV soon?
I'm not working on that.
I'm not working on that. Not working on that. Okay.
It's my first book.
Your first book. Okay. With, you just talked about being a great literary citizen and contributing to those causes, right? In interviews that I've read that you've given, you have mentioned that you grew up building your mind in the public library, right? So what do you see ahead for libraries? And as an author, how do you think that reading will maybe evolve or remain the same in the years to come as you think about the audience that you're writing for?
The thing that I'm very worried about for your generation and for younger people is your attention span. One of the things, and it's not your fault. Like, it's not Generation Z's fault. It's not the baby Generation Z's fault either. We are being programmed to care so much about things in a really shallow way because our attention is being pulled everywhere. Books are a way for you to hack that process. Like, I understand that we all have to know a lot of things and information is going to be given to us by fire hydrants. Like, I get that. However, a book, especially a physical object, and you put aside your phone for a bit, will help you get your attention back. So part of that is really important. Now, that means that books need to be available everywhere. Will books be available everywhere? Books that are out of copyright are available everywhere. But and other books, like newer books, for the most part, they're available in libraries. So if we really care about a democracy, we have to support libraries. Like, I wouldn't be here as a writer unless I came out of the library system because we didn't have money to buy books, and books aren't cheap. So.
Of course. It's interesting that you talk about that attention span. I'm sure many people here probably will think about this moving forward. So I want to switch gears a little bit. You're quite open about your faith and your Christianity, right? In a piece that you were involved in with The Atlantic, you share the idea that goodness can come from suffering. And that concept, that goodness can come from suffering, has influenced a lot of your work. So can we unpack that a little bit, right? What does that look and feel like in your day-to-day life when you're blueprinting a book, when you're building story arcs?
I grew up as a Christian. My grandfather was a Presbyterian minister, and he ran an orphanage for war orphans who came from Japan back to South Korea when they suffered from the bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So I come from a tradition where Christians actually have done good things with the problems that we have in the world today. That said, I've also felt very strongly that there are a lot of really shitty Christians. And I'm always kind of wondering, like, well, what's my faith in this? How do I behave in a world where most of the Christians who are out there who are arguing against things I don't believe in? What do I do about that? So I have this sort of macro philosophy and a macro, metaphysical problem. And then when I create my art, I try to think about, well, what is it that I want to say? And all of my characters get to present different sides of the argument. And that's really important because I think that if I was just sermonizing, no one would read my books, and I wouldn't read my books. I wouldn't even care. Writing a sermon is entirely different, or telling people what to believe is entirely different than letting my reader decide for himself or herself. My first novel, my main character is agnostic, and I wanted very much to have my main character be agnostic because I wanted her to present all of her doubts, because I think faith without doubt is not really a true faith at all. So, and as for goodness coming out of suffering, I mean, that has to be our hope, because if we just had meaningless suffering relentlessly throughout the creation of history, I don't know if we can go on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Kind of following that trail of suffering, we're going to transition over to challenges. You've also described your experience of, going to Yale, right? And being in a classroom and having to ask your fellow students, like, what is Stonehenge, Right. Now that you're so situated in your career, you're a well-known author, commercially successful, how do you find ways to retain empathy, right? To stretch your capacity for compassion, and also to find new ways to challenge yourself? Because you're so far evolved from where you were at like 17, 18, 19, that student at Yale who didn't have an idea of what Stonehenge was at the time.
Oh, actually, as a matter of fact, I always say this in public when people ask me about that essay. If I had Google Images back then, I would have been okay. So thank you, Google. Making me less good now. But I actually don't feel removed at all from that young person. As a matter of fact, I work really hard to keep that sensibility of wonder. I would never disavow that person that I was. Like, I really liked me at 17. I was a dork and awkward and socially like strange, and I still am in many ways. I just hide it much better. Like, I have better clothes than I did. I think that person was an innocent person. And I think to try to stay innocent in this world is one of the things that we have to do. Like, we have to be really wise and we have to be savvy, but we don't have to be cynical and we don't have to be jerks. So, and I think success could ruin a person. It really can. And it's something that you have to be on the watch for. In the same way, if you start making money, to forget that other people don't have money and it's not because they don't work hard, that requires some awareness of the way history works. And I think that constant learning can sometimes help you become a more compassionate person. But it's not always, because really well-educated people have committed some of the worst atrocities in the world. So it's not always education. But I think education plus compassion, those things.
I find it really fascinating to hear you describe it that way, because, my childhood sounds very similar to yours. And the idea of being 17, 18, being a little dorky and now evolving, maybe you have better clothes, better eyebrows, but at the end of the day, you kind of feel the same way inside. I would love to know, were there communities that help you stay grounded? What were some activities that you did, or literature that you read, or people that you stayed in touch with that helped you stay kind of on, well-rounded and grounded during the time when maybe you were commercially successfully taking off?
Oh, well, I'm a parent. So if you have a child, well, no, like, you are not that important. I'm married. I've been married for 26 years. So I'm fully aware of how wrong I am. And I mentioned those two things in case people have those kinds of relationships, because if you are honestly in love with people, if you honestly love people, you know how stupid you are. You know how many times you mess up. And I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing, because one of the things that I'm very devoted to is this idea of constant learning. And if I'm really constantly learning, that means that I have to listen when people don't like me, or if I mess up, and to be able to take criticism. That's terribly important for learning. And that really just happens in community. It happens in relationships. And I think that's, I don't like it sometimes. Like, I don't want to look like an asshole sometimes, but sometimes I do that just in my own house. And I just think like, oh, and also, it's really the worst part about being more busy is how I feel like I can't be as good of a friend as I should be. Because I have a lot of work. And then I have to kind of go like, well, I have to read this book and give this total stranger a quote. That means that I can't, which will take a day or 2 days for me to read somebody's work that I don't know. That means that I can't like have lunch with my friend, right? Like, I don't remember the last time I had lunch with a friend, really. Like, I mean, I'm talking years. Like, I also don't go on vacations. Most people don't know that. So I don't actually walk around feeling very successful. I always feel like I'm behind. And that's a personality thing. I also have mental health issues. I have anxiety and depression and OCD. And these are things that I really struggle with. So, and very often when I have to say no, it's really difficult for me. And I have to have all of my priorities set and kind of like, well, there's no way that you can do this, so then I have to say no.
So how do you combat, especially, during a time like this, the potential of like burnout? What helps you relax and unwind in day-to-day life?
I don't work on Sundays. So that's a non-negotiable. Like I don't even answer emails on Sundays unless you're dying. And that's important because I don't want to feel like a slave. And then the other 6 days, I do work round the clock. I do. So the other day on Monday, I went to bed at like 4 a.m, and I'm not proud of it. Like I think that I keep thinking maybe if I was more clever, I wouldn't have to work this way. And because I know other authors who pop out books every 2-3 years, stay on tour, and have their shit together. So I kind of think they just have got to be smarter than me. I don't know.
Those early years of corporate law never left. Well, I'm curious to also know, like, when it comes to always learning, right? What are you reading or consuming or interested in these past 2 months when all of us have been sheltering in place?
So I was talking about the Gatsby thing earlier. So I was asked to write an introduction for Penguin a while ago, several months ago. And I was like, oh, that sounds really interesting. I want to do that because I'm interested in it. And I've also read Gatsby, I don't know how many times. But I don't think I realized that much about his life. So then I went and I have literally right next to me about 15 different books about Gatsby, about Zelda. So at this point, I can get on Reddit and do an AMA on Fitzgerald. Everything. And then I realized part of it was for my essay, but most of it was just because I was really curious, like, how do you have this life? I mean, he had a really tragic life and also a very, Phoenix kind of life where he was so glorious. He was initially very, very glorious. And then he crashed and burned. And I guess he became more like Icarus more than Phoenix. But yeah. So doing the thing that I really care about, but it's not a very good priority for me because I should be doing something else that I promised to do. So it just becomes juggling.
Well, we're going to have Q&A in about the next 2 or 3 minutes. So I'm going to close off, on a high note here. What are some upcoming projects that we can look forward to in the next coming years from you for all your, lovely fans in the audience?
Oh, well, thank you. I have a memoir coming out, I think. I'm not quite sure when. I'm working on it right now. I've been working on it for about, like 20 years. Like off and on, I've been working on this project for about 20 years. And it's called Name Recognition. And it's a memoir. It's about learning how to talk. And it's about being an Asian American woman and being an immigrant and a refugee, and my childhood, but it's really about how I learned to express what I believe. And it's called Name Recognition. And I guess that'll come out before American Hagwon, which is the 3rd novel, which completes the trilogy, hopefully, of the Koreans.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Min. And now we're going to move over to the Q&A section. So this is a new experience for Min and I. So we're going to look through some of these many questions that are happening here on the side. So I think the first one that we're going to go into is from.
I didn't realize I was still on private chat. Golly.
Yeah, I'm in the live comment section right now. So this is from Sagamitra. Any advice on how you bridge the experience as an immigrant growing up in 2 quite different worlds in writing?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? I didn't.
So let me rephrase this. So do you have any advice on how to bridge experiences as an immigrant growing up in 2 very different worlds? Let's say like at home, maybe you have a very different world. Out in America or Canada or Australia, a very different world in writing.
Well, I don't know how you're going to feel about this answer. But your body is that bridge. It's actually you. You're the bridge between these 2 experiences. And if you're really authentic in both places, and if you're really honest in both places, then I think that you'll be a kind of a living testament to other people. Like you are literally witnessing to the world of how it is for both of you. Like I don't ever deny where I'm from. Like I'm not trying to pass for having had a country club background when I didn't. In the same way, if I'm at a country club and I've been to country clubs, I feel perfectly like, oh, why don't I have access to this? I mean, that's the beautiful promise of America is that you can have those opportunities in both places. But what I think really hurts people, and this shows up in my character Noah and Pachinko, is that if you try to pretend that you're something that you're not, it'll kill you.
literally in the book, and that did happen. I hope there wasn't a spoiler there for anyone who hasn't read the book, but far on to the next question. So this is a question coming from Jen. When do you find yourself facing artistic uncertainty or doubt in the story that you were trying to tell? And how do you overcome that artistic uncertainty or doubt?
Oh, holy shit. I mean, I'm doing this right now. Like, I'm writing this essay about Gatsby, and it's supposed to be a personal essay, but it's a sort of a scholarly essay. I've written 3,200 words in the past week, and I should have written 1,500. Like, I have the option of going longer. And guess what? This morning it occurred to me, and I was so pissed off because I was like, oh, it's wrong. Like, I hate this. I hate this so much. I'm going to have to start all over again. So I actually have to go now. But I feel this with every single piece of writing that I do. And my family watches me going like, you are so pathetic. What is your problem? But I never sit down and go like, oh, I got this. Like, I don't feel that way. I torture myself, and I go through all the work, and I go through all the research. And then I also draft so many times. Like, I did a talk like this with the New York Times recently. And I literally showed my wastebasket, like, with my drafts. Because my piece in the Times that came out, I guess, like 2 weeks ago, I was literally, like, I had handed it in the morning that I did a talk with the New York Times office. And they said there was a similar question. And I literally showed all of my pieces of paper. So, like, I can't, it's just too messy. But I scribble a lot, I outline, and then I just keep banging my head against my desk until blood shows up. I mean, how do I overcome it? I don't quit. Yes, I don't quit. Yes.
Winners never quit on themselves. You got to keep on running.
I wanted to share this one thing. It's very important. Is you have to look at yourself and your identity. And I believe that I'm a finisher. Like, I don't think I'm quick or smart or better than anybody else, but I definitely feel like I'm a finisher. And I think that makes me go like, okay, well, you're going to get there. It's just not going to be fast.
I like that attitude. It's so funny that you mentioned the talk in the New York Times. One of my very good friends is an editor there, and she actually went to the talk that you did there. And then she was also like, did you read Min's new article in the New York Times, the op-ed? If anyone who is on this line right now hasn't had the chance to, look at Jin Lee in the New York Times in the most recent op-ed. It's a really quite compelling story of, how we can be more empathetic to those who are kind of on the front lines or who are, doing a lot of the behind the scenes work that is helping us enjoy some of the modern conveniences that we have today. So on to the next question. What shall we choose? Okay. This question comes from Sarah Sin. How do you tell the stories of identities you may not have, or experiences you don't directly have in ways that respect those cultures or groups?
Oh, research, field work, interviews, and revision. And also, you better fucking get your facts straight. Like, I have no patience. Like, I tell my students, you can write about whatever you want to write about. But it's going to be harder if you don't know anything about it, if it's not within your experience. You should do it if you feel it's important for your stories. But then ask yourself why, and then also just do the work. And also, you should really check the sources. So I interview constantly. So if you wanted to write about something that's really not your lived experience, I would go to the places where they work. I would visit their homes if you can. I would listen to as many things as humanly possible. And then also be willing to show your work to that person or to that community. Because if you can't really stand the pain of the light, then you're not entitled to the light.
Thank you. And the next one, I just want to get in as many questions as possible. So let's see here. Why don't we take, two people have asked this question. Julian Hackney and Trang Pham, who are some of your favorite authors?
Oh, I think my favorite book of all time is George Eliot's Middlemarch. It's not a popular answer for modern readers. The books that have really influenced me that are modern Americans are probably Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, James Baldwin. In terms of Asian American authors that I have really admired, I mean, there's so many Asian American authors today. and I don't want to offend anybody. I think one of the things that most people haven't thought about is Clay Walls by Run Young Kim. Clay Walls, and it's a historic novel. The author is dead. And then in terms of 19th century novels of Americans, and early 20th century, Sinclair Lewis is somebody that I really loved. I do like Fitzgerald's Gatsby very much, so much so that I spent 2 weeks I shouldn't have been spending on this essay. And who else do I really love? Gosh, like, I'm so promiscuous when I read. I really want you to be promiscuous when you read, because I also read a lot of scholarship. I read a lot of biography, and I also read a lot of academic work, like university presses. I actually read sociology and economics. I really love economics. Most people don't know how much I do, but I do.
Thank you for sharing. Economics is a surprising one. Where do you usually get are these like economic books, economic like journals? Where are you kind of getting the information from? Out of curiosity for myself.
I'll even read like foreign affairs, like if they have an issue with economics. I'll read. I've been reading Capital recently. I read the business section pretty well. Like I'm always talking to Wall Street people. I talk to a lot of people who are like VC people. I want to understand power, and if you want to understand power, you have to understand money. So. It's not because I want money. It's really kind of like, how do you make these decisions? And also how are our lives affected by the way business people think? And that requires some understanding of philosophy, and economics is a philosophy.
Absolutely. I mean, it touches everything, every part of our lives, whether or not we may realize it or not. So the next question that we have here, let's take a look. Gosh, there's so many right now. I'm trying to go through. This is from Sharon Cam. Can you comment on mental health in the context of being Asian American and the culture of not talking about it, and how to stay the course without breaking?
Oh, I talk about it only because I have seen too many young Asian Americans suffer silently. And I want people to know that I have anxiety, I have depression, and I also have OCD. And I have been in therapy for over 2 decades. And it has been so incredibly important to me. And I really encourage folks to talk to people about it and to talk about it. And I realize there are discriminatory aspects of saying all those things. And I'm sharing it because I want you to know. And you could tell your parents, Jin Lee is crazy. I mean, whatever it is that you want to say, because I don't think of it as a negative thing to have these things. I just think it's part of it's part of who I am. So for example, OCD is a total pain in the ass to have. However, my work reflects how careful I am, how precise I am. So in that sense, I kind of think there's going to be some upside to this thing, but it takes me longer to do things because I care that much about precision. And rather than always thinking of it as something negative, you could really try to see it as not necessarily positive, but as something real with real repercussions. And the upside of being an anxious person, I will keep my word. Like, I will do what I said I was going to do for the most part, because so far my anxiety hasn't overtaken my competence. But I talk about all these things, and it's hard. It's really hard. Like, I had an eating disorder in college, and I've written about it, not because it's interesting to anybody really. At the same time, I'm so sick and tired of Asian Americans hating the way they look. I'm so sick and tired of it. Like, I think we're so hot.
I love it. I would agree too. I hope that the folks in the talk feel that way too. I actually love how you've used, Asian Americans and like hot and sexy during this talk, because this is rarely kind of a narrative that is pushed in modern mainstream culture. Hopefully one that will prevail in times to come, but I'm getting a kick out of it because I haven't heard anyone describe it that way before.
Isn't it weird if you think about it? Isn't that weird that people aren't talking about the fact that Asian Americans are funny or that they're attractive? Like, why don't we talk? Just recently, someone I know on Twitter was mentioning how great Asian American men's hair is. And I was like, yes, I co-sign.
This is very true.
And my son has great hair. And I'm thinking, yeah, but Why are you talking about how great Asian American men's hair is?
That's very true. I think we have room for just one more question. Let's go to Rena's question. Since this was going to be a conversation about writing, it makes sense that the last question that we have is in line with writing. And this is from Rena, and she is asking, what is the practice that we can do to be a better writer?
You're not going to like this answer, Rena. But I'm just going to share what I teach in my class. I have a requirement with my writing assignments, the ones that are graded, is that you hand in one draft, which is given a prospective grade. It's a temporary grade. So you might get, let's say, a B+ in this thing that you handle, but it's not counted. But the second draft has to be completely rewritten with the same story, which means you start at word 1. And then that draft is graded. And all of my students are like, what the fuck? Like, what do you have to write? It's not like moving stuff around, like moving a paragraph here or moving a paragraph there or changing a sentence. No. And I'm not asking you to copy it. I want you to start at word 1 and then see what happens. I have never seen a story get worse or an essay get worse as a result of starting at word 1. Just try it. Just try it once. You could get mad at me all you want to. But you might be surprised at how much better something is. So whenever, if you meet real writers who are publishing lots of books, they'll always talk about like, oh, I threw that draft out. That's because you had to.
So thank you, Min, for being with us here today. And thank you, everyone, for all your questions. I'm sorry that we can't get to all of them. But it was such a breath of fresh air to hear your optimism and the depth of the way that you think during these times. And just a kind reminder that we should all be empathetic and aware of everything that's happening around us. So thank you for coming to Google virtually to share this with us. And I wish there was a round of applause that you could hear, but me will just see me. But thank you, everyone, for being here today. And with that, we'll sign off. Thank you, Min.
Thank you.